This is our third class in our Lessons from the Life of Moses series, where we're going through the life of Moses, and we're not necessarily trying to learn the facts of the life of Moses to be able to regurgitate them, but we're looking at these stories from the life of Moses, and we're trying to take away principles or lessons that can inform the way that we live our life. So the story today that we're going to be looking at is the story of the burning bush. And as always, I think it's best to start every class in our text. So we're going to read a pretty long stretch of text. I think it's all of chapter 3, maybe half of chapter 4. And so I broke it down into, 6 different parts. And y'all have the cards for those different parts. So let's go ahead and turn our Bibles open to Exodus chapter 3. And then when the first person begins, we can start reading Exodus chapter 3, starting in verse 1. And then as soon as the section ends, then the next person with the section following can just pick right up after them until we get through this pretty large section. So let's start in Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. Exodus chapter 3, verse 1.
Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God.
Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? He said, But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain.
Moses said to God, If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, Say this to the people of Israel, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together, and say to them, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt,
Moses said to the Lord, "O my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and tongue." Then the Lord said to him, "Who has made man's mouth? Who has made him mute or deaf, or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak." But he said, "Oh my Lord, please send someone else." Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, "Is there not Aaron your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and you will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. And take in your hand his staff, in which you shall do the signs."
Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, "Please let me go back to my brothers in Egypt to see whether they are still alive." And Jethro said to Moses, "Go in peace." And the Lord said to Moses and Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all the men who are seeking your life are dead." So Moses took his wife and his sons and had them ride on a donkey, and went back to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the staff of God in his hand.
Great. Thank you to all the volunteers that helped out and read those verses. I have some things that I want to say and some points that I'd like to make in this story, because I think this is a really, really powerful and impactful story when you really look at some of the things that God says. But before we dive into any of that, what things stick out to y'all when you read the story or when you've studied the story in the past? Are there any themes or verses that really stick out as being particularly impactful to you?
Well, Jesus makes reference to verse 6 in Matthew 22 and something like verse 32 or 33. He makes reference to verse 6, and his reference is that proves that there is a resurrection of the dead. The fact that God told Moses, "I am the God of Abraham," not "I was the God of Abraham," but "I am the God of Abraham." Jesus makes reference to that. It's hard for me to read this account without thinking of that point that Jesus makes.
Yeah.
As it was mentioned in the prayer, to me, when I read this, I notice how patient God was with Moses, even though Moses kept saying, I can't do this, I can't do this. And he kept assuring him that he could do it, even with Aaron. So, I see.
Absolutely. Anything else?
We get God's name. He shows a part of his character and how he wants to be addressed, and he wants to be identified as the caretaker of Israel.
Yeah, I have those verses starting in chapter 3, verse 14, highlighted when he reveals himself and his name. I think that's a really, really impactful verse.
I find it interesting that as much as Moses said, I can't do this, everything that God equipped him with, God just pointed out what he already had. So he had everything he needed. God just said, you have this, you have this, you have this. And so it wasn't that he gave him some special talents, it was he pointed out what he did already have.
Mm-hmm. Is there another hand? Ian?
What was really cool was that like in the movie The Ten Commandments, when Moses was in there and then God said, "Here am I with the burning bush." I mean, God is not like physical like we are. He's like the spirit. So it was just like all we did was I heard him in the movie. I heard him, but God's not like that. He's all around, like everywhere we go in this world, like in my room, at work, wherever I'm at. God is with me all the time.
Good. Other hands?
What sticks out to me is the personal
Did we read in this section? No, it's actually right at the end of chapter 2. I also have that highlighted. Chapter 2, verse 24. God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. So it's like, yeah, very personal crying out there.
I feel like it's very human of Moses to make what God has requested about him. It wasn't about what God needed, it was about what Moses thought he was capable of or not capable of doing. And we can find ourselves in that situation too. If we can remove ourselves from the equation and focus on what God needs.
Yeah, I love that. A few of us mentioned the excuses that Moses makes, and that's sort of the framework I have my points oriented, which is each of his excuses kind of breaking down what we're talking about, what he said, how God responded to them. And I think that's a great point where Moses keeps making it about himself, and God is like, this is not about you, this is about me. Mark, did you have your hand raised?
Last week we talked a lot about his name and how it meant drawn out and called out.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that what stuck out to me at the beginning of this, Moses called, or God from the burning bush calls out Moses' name twice. It says they called him out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's almost redundant.
Absolutely. I love that too, because in my mind, Moses, he leaves Egypt. He has a home now and a wife and a family, and he's probably living a decent life. And God, once again, calls out to him and says, I have a purpose for you. I love that. So I have it broken down into 5 excuses by Moses, 5 excuses Moses makes about why he is inadequate or why he shouldn't go. And then for each of those, I want us to talk about today, when we make similar types of excuses, how does God respond to Moses? How does God respond to us? And what those excuses might look like today. So the first excuse is in chapter 3, verse 11, where Moses says, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" And that saying, who am I that I am worthy of doing this? Who am I that you call me to do this? The today version that I have written down is, I'm just not good enough. And I think we see that a lot nowadays, is whether we're called to evangelize or whether we're called to, do a sermon from a pulpit or an invitation, especially for newer Christians that are still walking in that newness of life and putting away the old self. This idea that I'm not good enough is very prevalent. And if you think from Moses' perspective, someone who grew up in Pharaoh's household, who didn't do much or anything really for the oppression of the Israelites and effectively abandoned them when he left, it's really notable that the first thing Moses says is, why me? Who am I? I'm not good enough to go and do this. And so from our perspective, looking at the excuse Moses makes and the way that we can think about this today, how do we respond to those difficult situations when we today don't feel like we're good enough for God? When we feel inadequate or we don't feel good enough, how do we respond to that?
Well, I feel like, especially when Moses is talking about, well, why me? I'm not eloquent in speech. I feel like it's easy to make those types of excuses and get inside your own head, right? We could give a million reasons, but I think God is reasonable. He gives us reasonable things to do because He's equipped us with the ability to react to those things He's asking us to do. Otherwise, I don't think He would ask us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just my take on a lot of the things He's asking Moses to do, because He constantly comes back to Moses, well, I equipped you with a mouth, so you could use that.
Yeah. How do you think God equips us?
I think we all have different talents, right? Someone could be equipped with speaking or teaching, like you're doing tonight. Someone could be equipped with singing. So I think it just depends person to person. I think throughout your life you can find that.
Mm-hmm.
I think to kind of piggyback off of that, we aren't always the ones doing the work. We're just kind of the messengers. It's God's love and it's God's word that does the heavy lifting. All we have to do is point the word of God.
once again, I think about that idea that it's not about Moses. It's about God, and Moses here is just the conduit to that, and it sort of seems like the same thing for us today. Is there another hand over here? Morgan?
I was going to say, I think being in a church family helps a lot because we can tell each other what we're good at and how we can be useful and who God says we are. Drawing from scriptures and ultimately helping each other to know who we are and where our identity is. And sometimes when you can't figure that out on your own, God's family can step in to fill that void and hopefully draw your eyes up. And that's really been helpful for me.
Mm-hmm. There's a phrase that I hear thrown around a lot, which is remember who you are. It's something for children. It's something just even for us brothers and sisters. Hey, remember who you are. And that's not, oh, remember those certifications you have. Remember all your training that you've been to. It's remember your identity. Primarily, it's remember your identity in Christ. And I think that could be a good reminder for Moses, a good reminder for us when we feel inadequate to say, you're not just someone. You're a son of a king or a daughter of a king. And that's really a powerful identity to have, to be an image bearer of God. I saw other hands, yeah.
I really like the Ephesians study that we're doing to see what God calls us. He calls us chosen, holy and blameless, adopted as sons, heirs to salvation. And so when I hear those titles, that sounds good enough. Obviously, the whole grace conversation, that none of it was of my own doing, in that it was God who takes all of us and exalts us as he exalted his son. And it plays so cool with the Moses story, because maybe there was a time in Moses' life where he would have had an appropriate audience before Pharaoh. I mean, I don't think that would have been out of the question for him to be able to go in, knowing members of the household and members of the court and things like that. But he's left that, and so he's like, no, I mean, I used to be kind of in that little clique, but I've left that now, so who am I? And God's like, no, you're going as my representative. There's not really a higher title.
Yeah, that's great. Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about the comparisons between Moses' excuses in Exodus and then Jeremiah's excuses in Jeremiah 1. And I just think it's interesting and a good example of how God often uses the unexpected people to proclaim his message. Where in some ways we would think Moses is the perfect person because he grew up in Egypt and he is familiar with that land, but also he left that land after committing murder. So in a lot of ways he's not a good person for that. And Jeremiah just has a lot of similar excuses. I don't know how to speak, and I'm too young, I'm not the right person. So it's just a common theme we see with the messengers of God. They don't often want to be the one to give the message, but God has chosen them for specific reasons.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Anyone else? Yeah.
In verse 12, when he says, you shall worship God at this mountain, I wonder how Moses felt when they got to that mountain. Did he remember what God had said to him? And just knowing that God is with him and what he said is happening. And so that would help him keep on going.
Mm-hmm. I want to press on to point or excuse number 2, which is, I don't know your name. And 3 verse 13, Moses says, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And today's version I found is, I don't know enough about God, which I hear this all the time. And you can tell me if y'all have heard it as well. Just, I want to say a prayer. These are Christians. These are people that are baptized into Christ. Oh, I really want to say a prayer, but I don't really know enough. I don't really know what to say. I've only been a Christian for few months, I haven't really studied that much, or, oh, I can't give an invitation, I've only, been a Christian for 6 months, a year, 2 years, on whatever, insert however much you want to do. And I think you see it a lot with new Christians or even older Christians that get called out to do a specific task or a specific purpose. Maybe it's lead a Bible class. I certainly feel that way. I mean, this is my first adult Bible class, and I've been a Christian for 7 years maybe, and still trying to put together this material. I'm thinking to myself, I do not know enough. I don't know enough about the Old Testament. I haven't studied the books of Moses nearly enough to put together this material, and I think there are times when that's a valid excuse. If you're trying to lead certain types of studies, you have to put in the work beforehand. But a lot of the times, it is just that. It's an excuse. I don't know enough about God. And so, in your own lives, have you ever felt overwhelmed because you don't know enough about God or didn't feel like you know enough about God? And then how did you handle that situation? Or how did someone around you handle that situation?
I think being authentic with people, and I try to be pretty honest with people, like, this is my walk, this is what I went through, and this is my story. I don't know enough, and even when I think I know, like, I don't know, really know a book of the Bible, and I think I got it, well then, like, Ryan preaches a lesson, and I'm like, oh, that's not what I thought it was, or because God is always he's not changing, but he's always kind of meeting us where we are. And I don't know, maybe a year ago when I thought that was about, that's what I needed a year ago, and now I need it for something else. But really just trying to be my authentic self and sharing my story. That's how I meet people where they're at, and sharing the gospel of who God is. And when people ask me questions, I don't know. I'm not good at faking it. I know some people are great at it. I'm just not. So, just that.
Yeah. One of the things that I've done in my own life, and I recommend other people, is if there's something you don't know, open up the Bible and figure it out. I mean, that's a simplistic way of saying it, because there are some things that are very complicated. But if someone comes to you and asks you a question you don't know, that's wonderful. Open up the Bible together and try to seek the answer out. Or if you're, thinking, oh, you heard something mentioned in a Bible class or in a sermon that you're not familiar with, that's a great time to open the Bible and start reading and trying to figure it out, understand. I think about Wade's comment earlier about God equipping us. There is no better equipment than God has given us than His Word. And so if we feel like we're lacking, well, this is the place to go to try to find that knowledge. Mm-hmm.
This is one of the 5 excuses on my list of things whenever I study with people, and it's like, okay, we've gone through the study, and now you know. And it's just like, now it's time to decide, do I want to be a Christian or not? And one of the things that pops up at the very top of that list is, I don't know enough yet.
Mm-hmm.
I've never read the Bible, that's what, I've never read the Bible all the way through. And then it's like, just imagine on Acts chapter 2, when they hear the gospel for the very first time, and they knew that Jesus was the Messiah, and that he'd been raised, and they were baptized. That's what, and then to think about the answer that God gives too. I don't know your name, and God said, I am. I mean, it's profound, but it's like, I'm God.
Yeah.
You know enough, let's go.
Yeah. I don't want to tell your story for you, but isn't it your story that you were asked to give an invitation for the first time and someone said to you, like, just talk about, why you're a Christian type of thing?
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, Ryan's comment, I certainly lived that before I was a Christian. That was an excuse I used. And looking back, there's probably different reasons why. But even fast forward past that, once I did become a Christian, and it was several years ago here, I remember before we did digital surveys, we did a paper survey of what do you want to participate in? Do you want to lead songs, teach class? Kevin was probably the one handing them out back then. And I remember very specifically, I did not check sermons, teaching, everything had to be maybe a prayer, but Lord's Supper helper, maybe usher, not Lord's Supper leader. And it wasn't 2 weeks later, Ed Gershon just caught me and just said, hey, do you want to lead a sermon one night? And I was like, I wanted to be like, did you not read my script? But I felt a little cornered, and I kind
That's great. I love that story. And I think it all comes back to just talking about the gospel. I think some of us young adults that have preached sermons in the past have a kind of a running joke where we ask, oh, am I ready? Like, how do my notes look and all that? And we just say, let's talk about Jesus. Like, get up there and talk about Jesus. I mean, no matter what you're preaching on, no matter what you're teaching on, like, just bring it back to Jesus. Talk about the gospel. Talk about what he did for you. That's ultimately all you have to do. Other comments? Yeah.
One of the encouraging passages I find when I think about I don't know enough about God is the ask and you will receive, knock and the door will be open, seek and you will find. And just like in this passage in chapter 3 towards that last paragraph, God's setting Moses up to, this is the end of what you're going to encounter as you go. You're going to be freed. You're going to take the spoils from the Egyptians. All this is going to happen. And so I think about that and the seek and you'll find. God's saying this not as maybe this is going to happen or, shoot for the moon and you'll hit the stars. No, he's saying, trust me, this is going to happen. Just come along and do what I say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Gives me a lot of freedom to let go and surrender my excuses.
Yeah. I think Josh hit on our just motto of the class. I'm just going to keep saying it. Like, it's not about you. It's about God. And like, just submit and let him do his work and, just give yourself up to him and it's incredible what will happen. I saw another hand over here, I'm pretty sure.
I was just gonna say, this is incredibly hard when you're like faced with sorrow or sadness or grief or like the time when God doesn't answer the prayer you want him to answer. And you have to remind yourself who he is by what he tells you and believe him. And I think just the only way to do that is by getting to know him and trusting what he says is true. But I can imagine Moses was in a trial when God asked him to do this and didn't want to do it. So that's incredibly relatable.
Amen. The third excuse is, what if they don't believe me? Chapter 4, verse 1, Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. And today's version of that is, I have nothing to offer God. And the reason I say that is because someone made the comment earlier, which is, Moses says, oh, they're not going to believe me. And God says, what's in your hand? Oh, I have a staff. Okay, we can use the staff. We'll turn it into a serpent. Oh, you have a cloak. Put your hand in your cloak. That'll, I'll work a miraculous gift through that, and through that they'll believe in you. And I think that's really cool because God doesn't have to do something absolutely crazy. It's, what do you have in your hand? What do you currently have with you? And so if you think, I have nothing to offer God, God turns to you and says, well, what do you have on you? You got clothes on your back, you have a staff in your hand, you have a Bible in your hand, you have a roof over your head. Great, we can use those things to serve me. And the question I want to talk about is, what do we need to have in order to serve God? Is there something that we feel like we need to have in order to serve God? Maybe this is kind of a trick question because you might be thinking, no, you don't need anything to serve God. But I think there are some things that you do need to have to serve God.
The willingness to.
Mm-hmm. The heart, too, is sort of what I had in my head, is the submission that we talked about earlier. Yeah.
Think about good soil. There's a lot that can be done with really good soil, and that is a reflection of us. How do we receive the word? How do we receive correction? How do we receive truth? Our response to God's commandments, and to keep the plant metaphor going later, are we bearing fruit? And so I have this thought all the time, if I go and talk to people, and I love talking about look what God has done for my life. And the Christian walk is such a great walk. And a lot of people don't believe me. They are so stressed and they are so burdened by all of the world, like they think that it's a facade. Like there's no way that you're that happy all the time. And I'm like, well, if you don't believe me, look at my life. I really am. But I think that that's maybe a fruit conversation, we forget that the simplest of the fruits of the Spirit is joy. And so just showing joy, maybe they'll believe that.
Mm-hmm. Jessica, do you have your hand raised?
It kind of combines with the last point in this one, in the willingness. It's learning to say yes when you're asked to do something. I'm content to just be in the background. I don't need to do other things. I'm content to support him in what he does. But I've had to learn over the years to say yes and put myself in a situation that I have to grow, that I have to do, that'll build me up, but also point others to the person that needs to be pointed to, God.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for some people.
Yeah. There's a Lisa Smith quote that I love that I have basically stolen. So it's basically a Nick Weaver quote at this point, which is, don't let the size of your home limit the amount of your generosity or limit the size of your hospitality. I don't know how we phrase it. And I love that idea, which is like, you can live in a shoebox. And guess what? If you live in a shoebox, use that shoebox to God's glory and to bring others to know him. If you live in a giant mansion, wonderful. You can use every corner, every inch of that mansion to bring people to closer to Christ and to do God's glory. And so I love that so much. Sometimes you're content to make excuses to be where you are, but it's like, what do you have in your hand? Where are you living? We can use that to worship God and to be generous and all the things God calls us to be. The fourth is, I am not a good speaker. And we've kind of hit on this already. In chapter 4, verse 10, Moses says, "Oh, my Lord, I am not eloquent." And today the excuse is often, I don't have any talent. I think Wade hit on this pretty good earlier when we were talking about the talents conversation. And I actually have the parable of the talents up there. And we can kind of skip it because we did talk a little bit about the soil and we talked a little bit about the talents a little bit earlier. I do want to read 1 Corinthians chapter 12, though. So if you want to turn there with me, let's turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And we're going to look at verses 12 through 20.
For even as the body is one and yet has many members, and all the members of the body, though they are many, are one body, so also is Christ. For by one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, whether slaves or free, and we were all made to drink of one Spirit. For the body is not one member, but many. If the foot says, because I am not a hand, I am not part of the body, it is not for this reason any the less a part of the body. And if the ear says, because I'm not an eye, am I not part of the body? It is not for this reason any the less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? But now God has placed the members, each one of them, in the body, just as he desired. If they are one member, where would the body be? But now there are many members, but one body.
Great, thank you, Bob. I really love that verse, and I think it fits in here because Moses is talking about how he's not a very good speaker, and Moses ends up responding and says, we have your brother Aaron. You know, you will say the words to him that I speak to you, and he can speak them to the people. And although Moses could very well and doesn't oftentimes speak out loud to the people on behalf of God or speak to Pharaoh, God is sort of reiterating this principle of people have different skills. Although this might not have been Moses' skill, he might not have been an eloquent speaker, there's others that are around him that are eloquent speakers, and they were able to do that job. And so once again, we see this theme pop up over and over again, where Moses is claiming, I'm inadequate in some way. I'm not a good speaker. I'm not able to do this. I'm not able to do that. But God says, everyone has their talents. Everyone is a different part of the body. And you can use those talents and serve God in whoever way he calls you to do. And I really love that. The fifth is ultimately just, Moses says, please send someone else. In chapter 4, verse 13, Moses says, oh my Lord, please send someone else. And ultimately, today's version of that is, I just can't do it. You know, I've run out of excuses. I've run out of things to say. I just can't do it. I just don't want to do it. Please send someone else. And I've certainly seen examples like this. I've often tried to get my brothers to come to worship here at Ellisville. One of them was baptized into Christ. The other ones have not yet. And oftentimes when I try to invite them or tell them to come, it's, oh, I have this thing in the morning. Oh, I have this going on. And it's okay, and then they don't come. And then next Sunday, hey, you should really come. Oh, I've got this other thing, or I'm actually going to be out of town that weekend. Okay, next weekend. And you keep pushing, and you keep asking, and you keep inviting. And ultimately, you get this response, which is, Nick, please just ask someone else. Maybe they won't say it just like that, but I just don't want to come. That's basically I'm running out of excuses. I don't have anything else. Please just send someone else. Do something, don't invite me. I've run out of excuses. And oftentimes, I find that with myself, standing around after services and you see a visitor and no one's talking to that visitor, and you might be thinking to yourself, oh, well, I'm tired, I had a rough morning, or, oh, I'm holding the baby, I can't, and you run through your head all these excuses that you might want to make of why you can't go, and it's like, oh, God will send someone else will go up to talk to them, and it's ultimately I just can't do it, or I just don't want to do it. And so in our lives, do we have moments or days when we feel like this, and how do we approach those situations where we just maybe don't want to do God's work, or don't feel like, God's work is convenient for us on that day? How do we handle that? Yeah, Mark.
When I have that type of situation, I think back to Esther and Mordecai, and think, well, maybe I'm here for this exact reason. Maybe there is nobody else to do it. Maybe that's why I'm being faced with this thing right now. So, because I've been trained on how to do it. Like Moses was trained as a shepherd. Moses was trained as in the Pharaoh's house. He had a lot of things going for him. Maybe that's why God asked him to do it.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
I was just thinking, like, in general, whether you're a Christian or not yet a Christian, someday it's just going to be too late. Like, someday we're going to run out of time, whether we haven't been baptized yet, or whether we are a Christian and we're waiting to evangelize, or we're a Christian and we're waiting to X, Y, and Z, we're making all these excuses for ourselves. Like, at some point it's going to catch up to us, and I always end up feeling way more regretful for the times I didn't than the times I did, even if I just didn't say the right thing or whatever it was. Like, I always regretted not more than I did doing it, even if it was like a flop, or just, maybe I didn't do it X, Y, one of these approaches, one of these excuses. So I just think about that, like, at what point am I going to get to in my life where I'm just like, it's never going to be the right time, maybe, but I'm going to run out of time someday. So.
Absolutely. I do want to get to my last point, so I'm sorry if there were other hands. The last point is God's answer to every single one of these excuses is the exact same. And I found that really, really cool. And it's not something I noticed until I was preparing for this class. And we don't really have time to dig into each of these, but I just put them all up on the board for you. His answer to each excuse is God. God is the answer to every single one of these excuses. Because once again, it's not about Moses, it's not about us, it's about God. And so every time Moses says, I feel inadequate, I'm not good enough, God says, I'm there with you, I'll be with you. When Moses says, who am I that I should go? God says, I will be with you. When Moses says, I don't know your name, God says, I am who I am. When Moses says, what if they don't believe me? God says, I will stretch out my hand, and I will give you these miracles to perform with these things that are already in your hand. And number 4, when Moses says, I'm not a very good speaker, God said, I will be with your mouth. And finally, when Moses says, just send someone else, God says, I will teach you what to do, you and Aaron. And I just see over and over and over again Moses saying, I'm inadequate, I'm not good enough, and God saying, I will be with you, I will work through you, just surrender your life to me. So God is ultimately God does not answer Moses' questions in the way that he asked, but instead says, I will be with you, indicating that his presence with Moses is essential to the call. I love that. He's not calling Moses because of who Moses is. He's calling Moses because of who God is. The Lord has not reproved Moses for his questions, but has responded by revealing his person and his purposes. I love that. He doesn't chastise Moses for asking these questions. He does get a little frustrated, but ultimately God says, we're going to get through this together because you are just a conduit for my awesome power. And so there's another verse and another question for us to think about. We don't really have time to talk about it, but I'll just leave you with this one word, evangelism. All of these things come back to our interactions with non-believers, and there's a whole conversation I had about that to dwell on that. So our takeaway tonight, before Moses was a leader, he felt inadequate and made excuses, yet God worked through his life and gave him the strength to do God's will. No more excuses. Thank you for being here tonight.